there's been a bit of a growing demand that I think actually stifles creativity a little bit. And that's been the constant push for Insomniac, the developers of Marvel's Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man 2, games that unfortunately didn't do as well like Sunset Overdrive. You know, they have a very big back catalog, even Ratchet & Clank, obviously. There's been this big push for them to be like the sole superhero video game developer, and I don't think it's a good thing. I actually saw this same thing, you know, back, I would say around the time of Arkham Knight, but even Arkham City, with Rocksteady games. And it's one of these things where I think it's interesting because, you know, before Rocksteady made Arkham Asylum, I actually don't think many people would have looked to that company, looked at what they had made before and said, hey, you guys should make a Batman game. You know, years before Spider-Man came out, I know that when Marvel's Spider-Man was announced, people looked at Insomniac and said, hey, this is a good company. We're excited for this. You know, these are good developers. They've done good work before. They're going to do a good job. But there weren't tons of people like fan pitching that Insomniac make Spider-Man, you know, before that was announced. That just wasn't really a huge push. And it's the same thing, especially with some lesser known developers for superhero games, like in terms of, they're not lesser known, but they're lesser known in the genre. Like even Sucker Punch. I don't think people would have pushed for Sucker Punch to have made a game like Infamous when they looked at games like Sly Cooper that they had worked on. You know, just like I don't think, you know, even in outside of a superhero realm, they would have pushed for Sucker Punch to make something like Ghost of Tsushima from looking at Infamous. And so I want to talk for a few minutes about this today in a little bit of a shorter video, because I think that this push to just kind of ramrod one studio as the face of superhero games is not actually very good for the industry, and it's not good for the games that they make either. So if you enjoy this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do have a question of the day for you, which is, when you're looking at the video game industry, is there a publisher or a team, like a development team or development studio, that you see that you could see making a really good game that a lot of people don't mention? Because whenever someone says, hey, who could make this game, I really just hear like Insomniac or Rocksteady. So I'm actually curious, who do you think is maybe an overlooked publisher or developer that you think could do a really good job with a certain game or a superhero team, whatever? I'm interested to hear that in the comments down below. Now, the reason this came to my mind was actually because of my recent video where I talked about the Marvel's Spider-Man 2 DLC. And I saw an article recently too, I don't remember who it was from, so I'm not really gonna get into it, but it was just kind of talking about how it's okay to let games breathe a little bit in between, you know, in between their releases. And it's okay for certain things to maybe not get DLC, or for certain games to just end, things like that, which I do agree with. At the same time, I also completely understand why there were a lot of people that were disappointed by the way, you know, Insomniac didn't release more content for Marvel's Spider-Man 2, or at least hasn't as of yet. Maybe they will in the future. We don't really know. But I think that there's this kind of insatiable hunger nowadays, which is understandable, that there's so much good content and so much bad content too, that when we get good content or when we get fun stuff, we really just want to see it succeed. We want to see the best for it. We want to see that world realized even more. So when people look at Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I see this same attitude, just for different reasons, from the game's biggest defenders and the game's biggest critics. People look at that world and they say, hey, I want this world to be even better. I want this world to have even more depth to it. Whether they disliked the world, maybe they thought the writing wasn't up to snuff, they didn't connect with the story, or they looked at some of that cut content from the Insomniac leak or rejected content or whatever you want to call it, and said, hey, that would have made this game more enjoyable for me, I would have liked it more. Or they're the biggest fan of the game ever, and they're looking at, hey, I just want more stuff to do in this game that I love. I've noticed that that is a big call. You know, it's a big call to action from people is, I either didn't like this thing, so I want it to get better, so I will like it, or I love this thing, so I want even more. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think that when that attitude enters the idea of video game development or even movie development, any of these things, where it kind of comes down to like, I would only trust this one studio to make every game, it hits a point where it's just not possible. You know, when you have a smaller studio, which Rocksteady wasn't and which Insomniac isn't, you know, where there are, at least with Insomniac, multiple teams that can work on stuff at the same time. So this isn't a concern for them. But when you have a smaller studio, you know, there's only so much that they can do, right? But then you look at someone like Insomniac with multiple teams, and you look at the stuff that they've been working on at the same time. Working on things like, obviously, Wolverine, and even Marvel's Spider-Man 2 actually concurrently. Now, not at the same development landmarks, because Spider-Man 2 had to come out much sooner, but when you look at the supposed amount of money that was spent on Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and the man hours that were spent on that while they were also developing Wolverine, and we know they were developing Wolverine because in the Insomniac leak, there actually was a playable, I would say, pre-alpha build of part of the game that was leaked, unfortunately, onto the internet, which people have kind of taken and run with. So we know they were developing stuff, right, at the same time. Well, we look at that, and we still find out that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 had a bunch of content that either was rejected before it got off the ground, or it had to be scrapped due to time, or certain things had to be reworked. Yes, I know that they did say that their main story stayed the same, and that's fine, but there are a lot of things from that leak that we saw that didn't make it into the game. You know, even things like street encounters with Venom didn't make it into the game. And it makes you wonder if they had more time and they weren't working on multiple projects at the same time, you know, or at least not to the same extent, and they weren't now seen as the Marvel video game developer, which I don't even know if they wanted that when they took Spider-Man, because they had the option to turn Spider-Man down, and they took it because they wanted to work with that IP, right? When you're looking at that, and you've kind of seen them be almost pigeonholed into the Marvel developer who sometimes gets to do Ratchet and Clank, it makes me wonder if things would have turned out a little better for Spider-Man 2 if that wasn't the case. You know, if maybe Insomniac was solely focused on that game and there was another team making Wolverine. I don't know who, but just some other developer. I don't know who. Someone else. It makes you wonder if maybe things could have been a little more consolidated. You know, if maybe there could have been less issues. And I've seen this kind of thing a lot where video game development teams and studios will be spread too thin, and it will take too much time and money to do things because there's always this focus on the next thing. Hey, the game's not out, but we have to start working on DLC. Hey, the game's not out, but we have to start working on a sequel. Hey, the game's not out, but we have to start working on this other game in the same universe, or this other game that's mildly tied to this game. And it does hit a point where I do wonder, just from the outside, as someone who is just one person, I found that when I start multiple projects at the same time, sometimes it unfortunately makes it so they can't all get the attention that they deserve. And I've heard this kind of thing from people who do work in the video game industry. You look at companies like Activision, this is one of the main reasons why Activision games, with things like Call of Duty, are so frustrating for those development teams. You know, I've talked to people who have worked at Activision who have told me about scrapped content that they didn't get into the game, or scrapped content that ended up being reworked as part of a proposed, not DLC drop, but like season drop of content, where it was like, well, we can't get that done, so add it to the roadmap and it'll get trickled out. That kind of thing is actually very common in the video game industry, and it's not usually the decision of those game developers. It's usually the decision of some kind of executive or management at the development team who's trying to appease a publisher. And so it's one of those things where I think a lot of times it splits your focus. But also, I really do think that if we were just going by giving one proven developer all the games, right? And even if they didn't have this problem of split focus, I wonder if we wouldn't have gotten a lot of the, you know, more interesting superhero games that we have seen. Put aside the divisiveness of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, because whether you loved it or hated it, it was divisive. There's just as many people on the far opposite spectrum of whoever's listening who feel the exact opposite way about that game. It's pretty split. I think most people agree the gameplay is fun, but like the story and these other things have kind of left the audience divided on what they did and didn't like. So even if you put that aside and you look back at Marvel's Spider-Man 1, you know, I really, like I said in the intro, I don't think many people would have looked at Ratchet and Clank and said, give these guys a superhero game. Maybe you did. Maybe you're like the Nostradamus in the comments and you know, saw that potential, but I don't think most people did. I don't think most people looked at Sucker Punch and they looked at games like Sly Cooper and they said, what if these guys make a superhero game about a guy who uses electricity powers? I just don't think that clicked for most people. And again, I don't think most people looked at Rocksteady, who was, I believe at the time before Arkham Asylum, most known for making basically a shooter. I'd have to look back and see what else they made, but that's the main thing I can think of. I don't think many would have looked at them and said, the Batman guys, give them Batman. And there's a lot of things like this too, where I've actually seen the opposite as well. You know, I think when Square Enix announced Marvel's Avengers, there were a lot of people, myself included, by the way, who thought, well, Square Enix has done a very good job on a lot of things. You know, they did like a great job on most Final Fantasy games. You know, they've done amazing work on a lot of JRPG games throughout, you know, the years. I know it's a little more divisive, but a lot of people really enjoyed the Tomb Raider reboots. And so people looked at them and thought, oh, well, this development house, this publisher, you know, the people under them, they've made a lot of underrated games. They made a lot of great games. There's some misses in there, but it seems like they've learned from those misses over the years and they know what they're doing. And then, you know, Marvel's Avengers came out and it's just kind of seen as mediocre. I think nowadays that game is in a lot better place than it was when it launched. It's actually decently enjoyable as a distraction type game, I think, but it's not like a great, super deep, amazing narrative or amazing gameplay loop or anything like that, right? And that's a game developer that I think had proven themselves with so many different types of games over the years, and still that ended up being kind of a miss with Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix ending up making Marvel's Avengers. So this is something where I look at how this attitude has been around Insomniac, and even before the absolute miss for most people. I know some loved it, but for a lot of people it did not connect, of, you know, Suicide Squad. I think most people didn't really expect Rocksteady to have a big miss like that, right? Because they had proven themselves with Arkham. So they're like, hey, Superman, hey, Justice League, what about a Flash game? You know, Rocksteady can do anything. And then we get Suicide Squad and it's like, well, maybe not anything, yikes. And this is kind of my point, is not that like it's not okay to speculate about stuff, or that this idea of like fan casting or fan pitches is bad. I think fan pitches are fun, and I think there's way too much elitism around them, where people say like, well, you don't know how to code, you don't know how to make games, who are you to offer any kind of idea or suggestion, or who are you to make any kind of thing, you know, this company is king. Like, there's too much of that too, like where it's this company over ideas mindset where people will defend these companies too much. I'm not trying to do that, but what I'm trying to say is that there are people, like human beings, who work at every single one of these companies, be it a publisher or the development teams and development houses under them, and there's only so much that those people can do at a time. I can't tell you how many times I've researched video game development history, and the common thread has come up of, we were in over our head, publishers expected this done too quickly or with too little manpower because we were working on like 3 projects at once, so people from Team A had to come over to help Team B, and Team C's game had to be completely scrapped before it got off the ground to help distribute them between Team A and B. That kind of thing comes up so often in development history, and it's because there's this overreaching idea of, we had a success, now put everything on these guys, and it is too much. I think it stifles creativity, it stifles the ability to manage workload, and it actually hurts fan expectations, because then you get things like Marvel's Spider-Man 2 where it comes out, you know, kind of divisive because people were so on board with 1, you know, and they expected the world out of 2, myself included, because it was like, well, Insomniac can't miss, you know, and then when it did miss for some people, it was more of a letdown, right? If that didn't happen to you, that's great. I'm not attacking the game. Same thing, by the way, though, for like Suicide Squad, an example I think more people can get on, or even Marvel's Avengers, an example I think more people can get on, because both of those were disliked, I'd argue, more than they were liked, right? So people are looking at the successes and they put so much on this company, you know, like they're gonna do it, they've done it before, and then when it doesn't really land, it's like, ugh, okay, what the hell happened? They lost the sauce, they don't know what they're doing anymore. And I think that skepticism is fair, and I think it's totally warranted in a lot of situations, and I think excitement is fair and warranted in a lot of situations. But I really did want to kind of just nail hit the nail on the head here in an ending by just saying, I think that putting too much projects, too much expectations on one developer or one development company, it ends up stifling this creativity and making the workload harder to manage, and then it makes it harder to actually end up with good games. You know, I think that one thing in closing that could help with this kind of idea is maybe instead of putting it all on one, maybe instead of Insomniac having their own universe for Marvel, right? I think it would have helped if maybe there was some kind of collaboration between these different publishers to just make sure that their lore didn't step on the foot of the entire universe, and just say, hey, Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, is actually in the Insomniac universe. Or hey, Marvel's Avengers, the game, is in that Insomniac universe. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. Where you just have like a loose collaboration to say, hey, here's our lore and our world building, here you go. If you could just try and not step on that in this one city in the United States or whatever of the world, great. And I think that you could have these shared universes and you could have these crossover type things that could work out, that don't all just have to be, hey, let's split our company into 3 or 4 development teams and try and work on all these things at once, and then we've got too much. That's kind of what I think would be better for this industry and be better for expectations and management. But that's just me. I mean, there's also a reason why these publishers are rich and I'm not. Obviously what they're doing is working, so what do I know? But anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Always interested in your thoughts down there. We do have our own Fortnite code, which is DJAY123. If you want to support our channel, that helps us out a lot. Also, we have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled, repurposed comic books, manga, magazines, comic strips, everything. Basically paper that's been damaged. What we do is we save some of that paper that is not damaged or is still usable. We turn it into new transformative art for our business, and then we recycle the rest. We keep it out of landfills and we make something cool for your home by transforming this art into something new. So I appreciate you very much. Hope you have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.